I'm really pleased to have Rob Van Varick here. He's one of the principals at Michael Graves Architecture and Design, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thank you. Who is here to have some fun? You guys are in the wrong place. No. So I work for Michael Graves, as Jeff said. And for any of those who may not be fully familiar with who Michael was, he was definitely one of the most influential architects and designers of our time. Just some background, Michael actually started his career as a modernist. This was his first built work. And right as he was gaining critical acclaim for this work, he walked away from it. It wasn't fulfilling to him. There was something missing. Modernism was about the machine and the material, and he wanted to do something that had a narrative, something that related to people. And Michael would always sort of reflect upon his time that he spent in Rome at the American Academy as where he really developed his foundation for his architectural language. And so Michael built this tremendous firm over his 50-year career. And it's a multidisciplinary firm. We do architecture, over 350 buildings around the world, from private residences to sprawling resorts, government buildings to elementary schools. We don't specialize in a type of work. We specialize in humanism. And so we cross the threshold and we do interior design. And my background is product design. So we've worked with a number of clients, Target, Alessi, a long list. And we rounded out with graphic design and branding. And me personally, I started with Michael in 2003, which is also when he became paralyzed. Michael spent the last 12 years of his life in a wheelchair. But it forced us, and it forced him and the company to sort of explore and go deeper on human experience as it related to accessibility and healthcare and aging. And when you think about your primary school education, everybody sort of has that teacher that they connected with, that sort of opened their eyes to look at and appreciate the world in a different way. Now imagine you got to spend all 12 years with that teacher. That's how I would describe my 12 years with Michael. So what I learned how to do is really leverage our knowledge of how people live, work, learn, and play to create deeply human, enduring design solutions. So tonight, as Jeff said, I want to talk about user experience. And it's always interesting to me that when people seek to make a new thing, they talk about making it intuitive. And they shouldn't. That's right, sorry guys, but bear with me. Intuitive is a sort of overused word, I think. And people talk about using it, and I think intuitive use is important. Don't get me wrong, it's one of the principles of universal design. It's one of the principles of our design philosophy as well. But when you look at the meaning of the word, easy to understand or operate without explicit instruction. It's an instinct. But the problem with intuitive use today is it's not instinctual. Everything that is intuitive to us today in the built and digital environment is a learned behavior. It's a product of use and experience. So if we're going to talk about learning, I want to dive into an idea. So in the 1970s, Noel Birch came up with this idea of the 4 stages of competence, or the 4 phases of learning. So the first phase is called unconscious incompetence. So this is where there's a skill, you don't understand what it is, you don't understand what it does, you don't even think it really holds much value to you. So to give an example to sort of describe what this is, think about walking. So an infant who can't walk would be unconsciously incompetent. The second phase is conscious incompetence. So now you may not understand still how to do the skill, but you recognize its value. And you recognize that there's some deficit in your life without it. So making mistakes is a big part of this phase. and getting through it. The third phase is conscious competence. And at this phase, you know how to do something, but it takes a lot of concentration to demonstrate this skill. And maybe you're breaking it down into small steps, no pun intended, but there's a lot of conscious involvement. And then the fourth and final phase is unconscious competence. So now you've had so much practice with the skill that it's basically become second nature. And you're so good at it, you can do that skill and other things like walking and chewing gum. Or maybe today a better example would be walking and using your phone. So what this idea doesn't successfully communicate is the experience, the journey that you take going through it. So to make it make more sense, I want to sort of smash it up with another idea, the learning curve. The learning curve's a thing. You know, we've all heard the statement, oh, it's got a really steep learning curve. Well, this is what it means. As we gain experience, we learn. And it's a curve because learning is not a linear process. It's not called the learning line. So this correlates to those sort of four phases of learning. And it makes the learning curve make a little bit more sense, where at the beginning, you're not really making any progress. And as you start to learn, you start to sort of ramp up. As you really get a handle on the skill and you can do it, it starts to taper off, and then it plateaus at the end. That's where it becomes intuitive. So the reason that I go into this is this correlates back to what we do in design. When you think about creating new products and what you're aiming to create, all of these sort of four phases relate to how we sort of describe a new product. So working backwards down the curve, if you're going to release something that is fully intuitive and people get it, you're basically doing a refresh. If you ask people to sort of take a step back and utilize skills they have, but maybe in a slightly different way that they need to think about a little bit more, you're doing something that's evolutionary. You keep going back, now you have something that's transformative. And if you're releasing something that just nobody had any awareness of at all, now you have a disruptive product. So let's look at some examples. And let's start with the refresh. So what would be the point of doing a refresh? So we've been working with this company, and we partner with Mobelux on this client as well. So this is a white noise machine. This product's been out for 50 years. People love it. They love how it works. They don't necessarily love how it looks. And so we were approached to give it an update. Now, the reason people love it is there's a fan inside that makes this great sort of white noise tone. So you can't mess with that at all. We can't just change what it looks like. And this is a product that has tens of thousands of positive reviews on Amazon. So they really don't want to mess with it. They just want to make it more friendly, more approachable. And so that's what we did. We kept all of the geometry, but through the use of form and texture, we made it a little more friendly, more approachable. And now it's something that they're utilizing to expand that line and pursue things that are more evolutionary and even transformative. So that lives there on the curve. What about something that's disruptive? So for that, let's go all the way back to the 1880s. The bicycle. So the 1880s is when the bicycle started to look like what we know today. It had same-size tires, pneumatic tires, chain drive, and at this point, it was no longer a sort of dangerous toy for sporting young men. It was more accessible to the middle class. Susan B. Anthony called the bicycle the freedom machine because it gave women a sense of freedom and self-reliance that they didn't have up until then. So who here remembers learning to ride a bike? I remember learning to ride a bike. So this is me. This was the day that the training wheels came off my bike for the very first time. And I remember that feeling of, I lived on a cul-de-sac, so going out of my driveway and starting to ride up the road and just how fluid that felt and how unencumbered without these sort of training wheels hitting the ground all the time. And I got about 50 feet, and then the pedals just stopped. And this is the kind of bike that has coaster brakes, so the bike stopped. And I went to put my foot down, and my foot was attached to the pedal. So I fell over. And so this is when I learned to tie your shoelaces when you go out and ride your bike. So this brings up another dimension to this idea of the learning curve. They have different shapes. They look different. So riding a bike looks maybe something a little bit more like this. There's more of a struggle in the beginning. It takes a while to get there. But once you get there, there's a reason why there's the saying, it's like riding a bike. And the reason they say this is, once you have this skill, you have it for the rest of your life. That's different today with technology. So when you look at another disruptive product, when the iPhone came out, look at phones and what they looked like then, and people always talk about Apple making really intuitive products. I would argue that Apple was really good at mastering the user experience and understanding the learning curve, because their products have a curve that looks more like this. It's easy to understand and get up to speed quickly, but there's still learning involved. But there's a difference when you look at technology today, because while you only learn to ride the bike once, and that hasn't changed in over 100 years, technology is constantly evolving. Software is constantly updating, challenging us to learn new things, and even at times backing up in order to advance. And that's why the statement is it's like riding a bike and not it's like using a Palm Pilot. We move on. And the point of all of this is that intuitive use should not be the goal. It should be the outcome of a great user experience. Because what's intuitive today may not be intuitive tomorrow. And for another great example of this, think about the ice cube tray. So this is an ice cube tray from GE in 1952. Making ice in your home was a disruptive idea when it first happened. I mean, imagine the power of being able to fill up a tray and in a few short hours have ice that you can enjoy an ice cold drink in your house. But people got familiar with it, and it generally didn't advance much over the decades that followed. It got made out of plastic, so it was cheaper. People came up with fun ideas, making it easier to fill, easier to empty, easier to fill and empty, or just making it very fun. Now, all of these are focused on the user experience, but these are more evolutionary ideas. So another sort of funny experience happened to me this summer. At our house, we have a refrigerator with an ice dispenser on it, as many refrigerators do today. I also have 3 children, and we were staying at a house that had a refrigerator that didn't have an ice dispenser on it. So as I was filling up trays to make ice, my kids came over and said, "What the heck is that thing?" And it just blew my mind. So that's because at some point, some designers stepped back and really took a look at the user experience of making ice and said, why don't we just make the freezer do the work for us? Why can't we just walk up and dispense ice on demand? That was a disruptive idea. And it illustrates that while an ice cube tray may be very intuitive to me and the rest of you in the audience, there's an entire generation of people growing up that is not an intuitive experience. It's also cultural and contextual. Only 3/4 of homes in the world have a refrigerator at all. So for 25% of households in the world, this entire conversation doesn't make sense. So now let's make that new thing, right? And let's focus on user experience, not making it intuitive. Still not so much. Doesn't mean that you should ignore intuition. If you focus only on solutions and not the experience that goes along with them, you risk sending false signals. So we worked on redesigning the wheelchair for the hospital a few years ago. And when we were conducting research, and we did a lot of research, we went to a lot of hospitals, we came across a product that seemed to ignore the user experience. They came up with a solution that sort of created a counterintuitive situation for people. So it was this product, and they came up with a really novel way of saving space by making them nest like shopping carts. And so the geometry is inspired by that. It's narrow at the front, larger at the rear, so one can fit inside of the other. But what this makes is a really unsafe condition for trying to sit in that chair, especially if those little footrests are down. So what they actually do, what we learned in our research was this has instructions for how to get into the chair. So how many people here needed instructions for how to sit in your seat tonight? And if I had given you instructions, how many of you would have followed it? So the way you're supposed to sit in this chair is raise the armrest, sit in it from the side, pivot, and lower the armrest. It's that simple. So what do you do differently so you can design a wheelchair that focuses on the user experience? Well, I'm glad you asked. So you notice that in what we did, it's completely open. It's got wide open access, so as you approach this chair, there's nothing in your way. And to make sure that happens, the footrests are spring-loaded, so they're always up. They can never be down in the way. We also came up with another solution, which is the shape of those armrests, which we call stand-assist armrests. And the reason we call them that is pretty self-evident, but they're further forward and higher up. We noticed this thing in the hospitals that we call grope and hope, which was when people were sitting down into a chair, they were sort of reaching for those armrests, hoping they were going to find them, and then falling into it. So we designed an armrest that as soon as you walk up to the chair, you can hold on to it the entire way when you're sitting down and the entire way when you're standing back up, making for a much safer experience. And it was through that same filter that we redesigned this entire product. And we successfully solved for reducing patient falls, reducing clinician back strain and injury, reducing the spread of infection, which is a huge problem in hospitals today, as well as reducing theft of wheelchairs and lost parts of wheelchairs. And it still nests. So you can do it. Most advances that we see today are happening because people are challenging intuition. And this is because intuition isn't the goal. It's the outcome. It's the end of the learning curve. So you have to focus on solving a problem and the user experience that goes along with that solution. What do you want the experience, what do you want that learning curve to look like? People are busy. What are they going to be willing to learn? How many hoops are they going to be willing to jump through to learn your new thing? And in almost every project that we do with clients, project is just sort of a euphemism for problem. So when we're seeking to solve these problems, we need to understand and visualize that user experience. We need to understand and visualize the changes that we're asking people to make to their rituals. And those changes need to be for the better. So how do you do it? Well, crafting a great user experience sort of centers around three big ideas. The first for us is empathy. Understand the people for whom you are solving the problem. Understand the context of the situation, what drives them, what is intuitive for them. Understand their existing user experience. The second is vision. So if empathy is about understanding the existing user experience, creating a vision is about imagining a new one and visualizing it for people. And then the third is validation. You won't know if your solution is delivering a better user experience until you test it. So I want to run through some tools that we use that I hope you will find beneficial as well. So like any sort of experienced craftsman, I think designers have a lot of tools at their disposal. And like any experienced craftsman, you have your favorite tools. So while there's a lot of things that we can do as designers to create new products, new experiences, these are the ones that are really core for focusing on user experience. And it starts with ethnography for us. So when I talked about creating the transport chair, we went to 48 different hospitals across the US and the European Union. And we shadowed escorts. We're walking 8 to 13 miles a day with these folks, experiencing all the places where they're bending and straining and stretching and invading patients' privacy. We're also looking at it through the patient's perspective. You know, how does it feel when that chart gets shoved in that back pocket and now it feels like you're leaning against the board? How does it feel when you're left somewhere and that vinyl seat is sagging so low that you're actually sitting on the cross members? We see people using chairs to suit their needs by hanging all their bags off the IV poles. We see patients who feel like they're not ready to leave the hospital yet as they're getting discharged when they're getting out of their bed, but some sort of miracle happened on the way to the curb that they're jumping out of the chair when they get there to get in their car before the escort can engage the brakes. So now that person's trying to hurdle over footrests, and if they fall, their insurance company isn't going to cover that readmittance to the hospital. The hospital now has to pay for that. That's why this is such a big issue for hospitals. And that's why the flip-up footrests are such a great solution. And we're looking at it from the hospital standpoint as well. Think about a wheelchair from a user experience standpoint with healthcare. When you enter the hospital, this is the first piece of equipment you see. This is setting the tone for your entire experience. And if what you see are these sort of rusty, folded letters stenciled on the back, how sort of top-notch is that service in your mind that you're about to receive? So another tool that we use heavily all the time is benchmarking. So benchmarking is where you're going out and you're finding out what is out there, what are the current offerings. But it's not only about that, this is also about getting inspiration. So again, with the transport chair, what other transport chairs are out there? What do they do? What do they cost? What are their features? But also, what else could we be looking at? What other cool chairs are out there? Why do we like them? We looked at shopping carts and strollers, places where people are investing money, where people are investing in a user experience. And then the third tool that I want to talk about for empathy is product use. So switching to a different type of product than the transport chair, we spent many years designing products for Target. One of the categories that I loved working in was cleaning supplies. And part of our process was going out and buying all of the cleaning supplies on the market and using them. Michael's house has never been so clean. But an interesting thing happened one year where we had split into two groups. We were testing the brooms, and we came back, and there were like 12 brooms that we were testing. So group A comes back and says, we love broom 1, and broom 8 is the worst. And the other group came back and said, broom 8 is the best, and broom 1 is the worst. And nothing like that had ever happened where it was so polar opposite. And that was because one group preferred the experience of sort of stiffer bristles and how that felt to sweep, and the other group liked the sort of softer bristles. And they each hated the other one. But what we did with that was we launched 2 separate brooms, and we marketed one as a firm sweep and one as a smooth sweep. And we nearly doubled our sales because of going through that exercise and realizing that there was something at play here. There wasn't one right answer, there were 2 right answers. Now, cleaning products you sort of use and you put away. When we were redesigning a cane recently, that's a different product experience. A cane is with you all day. So instead of having a designer sort of pick it up and walk across the studio and give their expert assessment on how to make a better cane, we had all the designers use a cane for a week, take it with them everywhere. That's what this product is about. You can do the ethnography and hear somebody complain about how frustrating it is to lean your cane up and have it fall over. It's another thing when it's you who are in that restaurant and your cane falls over and everybody looks at you. That you don't find out through ethnography. I remember going into Bed Bath & Beyond with a cane and how all of a sudden people are coming up to me, can I get you a basket? Do you need anything? Oh, can I get you anything? That doesn't happen to me on any given day. So you have to go through those experiences to get empathy when you can. So once you've developed all of that, what do you do with it? So of course, drawing and brainstorming, all of those sort of go-to devices for designers to come up with ideas are good, but when you're focusing on user experience, we turn to role-playing. And this is an activity that everyone can do. We did it as children. It's playing make-believe. But now you're doing it in the context of the knowledge that you have. So here you see a couple of designers in the studio. You don't need fancy tools. You don't need fancy props. Just grab the stuff that's around you, but go through the motions. Go through what you were seeing. And I'm going to sort of show what this turned out to, but this was sort of looking at the office environment. And for a very different office environment than the one we work in. This is our sort of 1800s house in Princeton, which is a much different experience than what you guys have here. So, but you go through that, and this is, now you're experiencing the sort of physicality of it. You're bending and you're reaching and you're lifting and you're passing through spaces in a way that if you're just brainstorming with Post-its or you're sitting at a desk drawing, you're not really in that experience. So once you capture that, how do you show it? So in the digital space, in UX, you talk a lot about wireframing and taking people through a journey. For us, we utilize a tool we call Day in the Life. And for an example, we did some concept work for Herman Miller. And so Herman Miller makes the chairs that you're all sitting on. Thank you guys for teeing that up so nicely. They also own Design Within Reach. So they are in your life in the workplace and at home. They make some of the most iconic products that surround us. And Herman Miller is really framing out their future as a lifestyle brand. And that's something that we know a lot about because we think of ourselves that way as well. So we were looking at this idea of the shifting work-home life balance. And as technology gets smaller, communication gets faster, expectations get higher on employees. We don't just take our work home with us, we take it everywhere with us. And with that work comes all of this stuff. And so the idea came up for Herman Miller of doing bags, be that sort of bridge between the office and home and the rest of life. Now, we didn't just sort of sit down and sketch like what a cool bag could be. We did it through role-playing. And based on what we came up with, we also identified some new furniture archetypes that could be interesting for them to pursue. So the day in the life looks like this. It's an expressive composition. It's a story. And this is your chance to really sort of bring people in and make it immersive. So I'm going to walk through this with you. So meet May Miller. May is a young urban professional. She sweats the details. And she's a design aficionado. Life is colorful. Organization can be too. How many times have you fumbled in your bag for something, thinking, I'm pretty sure I put it in this pocket, but I'm not sure? Or how many times have you told somebody to grab something out of your bag? It's in the big pocket, but it's in the front pocket inside of the big pocket. What if we just color-coded the pockets? So now you can say, it's in the blue pocket. Make it easier. Let's integrate LED lights to make quick access more brilliant. If you don't realize it already, now you'll focus on how much you're sort of scrambling for light in your bag when you're trying to find something. Getting into work shouldn't be work. In a lot of large companies, there's badge access, and people are sort of scrambling in the morning with their coffee and all these other things looking for that badge. Let's make a spot in the bag to put that badge so getting into work is easy. Another interesting thing is happening in the workplace today, which people call hoteling, where you don't have a desk. You sign up for a desk at the beginning of a day, and that's because they're trying to make their footprint smaller. So you work from home some days, and other days you pick out a desk. So there's a lot of lockers being used. But how do you get the stuff from your locker to your desk for the day? So let's make lockers that are your sort of tabaret. And what if we can integrate power into that so when it docks into the desk, anything that you have sort of plugged in and charging in there continues to charge? Collaborate in style with an integrated hook to keep your bag off the floor. This is an accessory that they sell for purses all the time. Why not integrate that into a bag? So instead of finding a clean spot on the floor or taking up valuable seating space, you can hang it off the edge of a table. What if we design other furniture too to accommodate all our stuff? In meetings now, people sort of fly in and fly back. So they have their suitcases with them, they have their coats with them, they're sort of on the road. But they come into a conference room that isn't set up, so all of these bags sort of find their way into a corner or your coat's hanging on a chair. So let's design furniture with that in mind. Let's make a place for the suitcases. Let's let people charge their devices rather than scrambling for an outlet in the room and then having to leave it on the floor while it charges. Let's make a telescoping coat hook. Now, when it's time to go, the mini duffel can come along for the ride. People don't just necessarily go straight home. They go to the gym, they go do other things. So we came up with this little gym duffel that you could have your clothes in, and you just strap it onto your bag rather than carrying multiple bags with you. RFID tag your items, so when you leave, nothing gets left behind. Make the bag adaptable. Just simple maneuver with the strap, so if you want to hang it in a locker, it's suited to do that. Full of energy, just like you. And a lot of these are ideas that are out there now on the market, but when we did the work, they were not. So integrate the battery. Make the cord easy to get to rather than scrambling and having to think about all this stuff. It's just there. And let's make other things that are smart and hardworking anywhere, just like you. A valet piece when you come inside your door, so when you hang up your bag, it's charging your bag for you. You don't have to plug one more thing in. And if that's charged, why not make it display the time and temperature? Make it a great piece of furniture for your home. And as people do work at night, let's give them furniture that helps them do that work. Let's create some new archetypes for the home that is convertible. So that's the day in the life tool. And then the third section is about validation. So prototyping. With the transport chair, we did a lot of prototypes. We did this with Stryker Medical. They had a couple of storage facilities just full of prototypes at the end of it. They don't have to be sophisticated. We were just cutting 2x4s and screwing them together, getting a sense of the space, go through the motions, experience it yourself. Don't just sort of theorize and say, we came up with it, let's move on to the next thing. And then we got more sophisticated with it as we got into welding things, testing out mechanisms. But then you do need to take it out. Do consumer preference testing. With the transport chair, we took out concepts that tested out how different footrests would work. And we brought them to hospitals and we asked people to try them out. And we learned a lot. And a lot of our sort of theories got sort of shattered. We thought that was going to be a great idea, but everybody hated it. And so you move on and you adapt. And here you see the flip-up footrest coming in. Even though they look like sort of cheese graters for your feet at this point, that wasn't what it was about. It doesn't have to necessarily look pretty. Maybe this category was a little bit of low-hanging fruit compared to the wheelchairs that are in hospitals. The first round that we brought out, people were like, sweet, this is great. And then our third round started to look more like the final thing, where we were just sort of doing some A/B testing on different mechanisms. So that is a lot of content, I think, to take in one sitting. And I used a lot of different examples in going through it. And I did so intentionally, because everything has one thing in common. Everything has a user experience associated with it. And so in the world of design, we have so many constraints. There's timing, cost, feasibility, privacy, safety. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of things that we have to think about. But businesses today are winning on user experience. When you think about people talking about millennials today, they want to buy an experience, not a product. That's universal. Everybody wants a better experience. So as technology continues to advance faster and faster, and it continues to sort of be disseminated out from these products into the physical world again, coming up with solutions that a few years ago we might have thought was impossible, now we can do these things, we have to really focus on the user experience. And we have to focus on the learning curve that's going to go with that and what that's going to look like. Because at the end of the day, you may just be designing the future of intuition. Thank you.